All right, we started recording here. This is the 5 p.m. class meeting for ENC 1102, course number 30089. Just as a side note, this video is also intended for the day class 1102 30090 CRN. And I'm going to be discussing some topics tonight that apply to both classes. The first thing I'm going to address is the poetry reading. Since the online class is just a little bit behind the day class. So day class, what I will do for you is when I post the link to the video, when I upload it to YouTube, I'll also include in the email and a little note on Blackboard the actual timestamp that will start the Hamlet discussion, because the stuff that I'm going to be showing here for the poetry section you guys have already completed. So just bear with me. I'm going to go through that very quickly, very briefly, just to make sure that the online students understand what the requirements are for the paper. And then we will start talking about Hamlet afterwards. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And let me flip this over to share my Google. Okay, let me reset that. I saw a setting in there. I want to make sure share sound. Yeah, I do want to share sound. Oh no, yeah. Well, yeah, we want to do both. Optimize for video. Do that. Okay, this should work. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about again is the poetry assignment that is due. I think it's July 25th. Yeah, right here, the poetry essay. So what are the requirements for that essay? Now, I assume that everybody's already perused and analyzed the poems from each of the three sections. At our last class meeting, I invited anyone to ask questions via email. And then what I would do is in response to the poetry section was offer a little bit of insight into the poems depending on the questions that were asked. As of today, I have not received any questions. So I am assuming that everybody is good to go on the poetry section. Hopefully that's the case. If not, you still have a little bit of time to send me your questions. And I will do my best to answer them. If there's a lot of people asking the same question, I'll produce a little video to help you out with that. But to be honest with you, the poetry assignment's probably the easiest out of all three. And it's intentionally done that way because there's a lot of abstract nature to poetry. As I've told my day students, the poems and the nature of poetry itself, whereas fiction is a little more logical, you can analyze it by character, plot, and theme. With poetry, you have to throw the logic out, not entirely, but mostly, because it taps into a different side of your brain, which is the right side of the brain. And that kind of depends on imagery and symbolism and tone, being able to relate to the poet in an intimate way, to understand the thoughts and feelings and emotions that they're trying to convey to you, the reader, through the use of symbolism, through the use of imagery and the actual tone itself. So having said that, the poetry essay is pretty straightforward. I did want to address a couple of things that might be a little confusing. So number one, this is a draft document. To be honest, I've been a little disorganized this summer. I apologize for that. And in response, I'm going to kind of address some of the things that might, why is this not downloading? Wow. Okay. Well, let's see if I can bring my section up here. There's always a different way to get around a problem here. So going into module 2, golly, yeah, this is just not my day. This has not been my week either. Yeah, well, let me try to download it in oh, Blackboard's crashed. That's why. Wow, that's not good. Okay, well, and it just downloaded. All right, here we go. I'm sorry, y'all. It should not be this difficult. But Blackboard's been messing up all day, so we'll just see what's going on. So as I've addressed in the requirements document, we are using the major elements of theme, tone, symbolism, imagery, and style, along with the meter and rhyme scheme. If this were an intro to poetics class or an actual poetry literary class, we would spend a lot of time analyzing the use of rhyme scheme. But in the interest of time, especially in this online environment, 6 weeks, we just don't have a lot of time to deep dive into it. And I'm so sorry for that. But that doesn't mean we can't get the true gist of the poems that we were looking at. So of course, what I've asked you to do for this assignment is pick one poet out of the group of poetry readings that you've been assigned. So that would include the sonnets with William Shakespeare, Sights and Sounds with Langston Hughes, John Keats, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, or Alfred Lord Tennyson. In addition to the internal, external, what I like to style as metaphysics, and in more of the spiritual and ethereal realm, Seamus Heaney, Percy Shelley, George Herbert, and Dylan Thomas. Any of those poets you can select for your assignment, and this is basically the nature of the assignment. It's a 2-part assignment. As you can see here, this assignment will be part biographical and part analytical. Again, to really understand poetry, you need to have a basic understanding of who the poet was, the time in which that poet lived, any of the major political events that were going on in the day. So if this happened to be, like for this case, for instance, William Shakespeare, the fact that Queen Elizabeth the First, or perhaps King James, both of those monarchs sat on the throne while William Shakespeare was alive and was writing poems and different plays. That would be an important thing to note. So anything that has to do with religion, politics, culture, basically all of the aspects of what we call societal culture and humanities, wrapped into one nice little package. All of those things influence any writer's work, but specifically a poet's work, because a poet is attempting to react to the situation of the day or the events of the day or the spirit of the age, whatever, from an emotional, illogical place. And being able to tap into some of that background biographical information can kind of give you some clues as to why the poet referred to this political figure in this way, or maybe in the case of Shakespeare specifically, one of those poems in there, in the second one, My Mistress's Eyes Are Nothing Like the Sun, there are a lot of references to a middle-aged woman who is not the goddess that he perceived her to be in his younger years. And in some ways, from an academic point of view, we can assume that William Shakespeare was possibly referring to Elizabeth I because of the effects of smallpox on her body when she was a teenager left her so scarred. She had to hide a lot of the imperfections that she had through the use of makeup and wigs and costumes and stuff. So those, like I said, those biographical little things in the biography and in the cultural reference of the poet can give you little indications here or there, when, especially when you're reading a poem, trying to figure out what in the hell this thing is about and about whom. Understanding the time in which that poet that lived can kind of give you some indications of a little bit of the context of the poem, especially when you're talking about one that's very abstract. So that's a good example of using the historical context to help you identify some of these clues and get some answers to the questions that you're looking at. So having said that, that's why I wanted you to do a two-part essay, one on the biographical information of the poet, his birthplace, the politics of the time, major events, wars. And then the second part, you actually analyze one of the poems that you read. By that, in the case of Shakespeare, there were three, but if you selected one of the other poets, you're going to use that one that we read in here. Now, at the same time, I am allowing people, if they want to deep dive into the analytics of some of the tone, the symbolism, the imagery that's being used in that poem, if you've identified some other poems written by that poet that uses those same metrics or elements, you're welcome to discuss those in your paper as well. But at a bare minimum, your paper should analyze the work, one of the assigned readings from this class. And again, I'm just looking for 3 to 4 page essay, 4 to 6 academic sources, MLA, all that good stuff. Same stuff applies as the last one. And again, this, like I said, this poetry assignment is not very difficult. It happens to be the easiest one out of the whole class. Fiction probably being the hardest one, Hamlet number 2, and then poet number 3 in level of complexity. So this is an assignment that you can knock out pretty quickly. That shouldn't be a need for a lot of time on it. So when you get to that analytical section, basically what I'm looking for is key mentions to the tone, the theme, any kind of symbolism that you picked up on, and imagery and style. And again, the outside research that you're going to bring to the table, specifically through the library databases or through Google, kind of a Google Scholar search. Credible academic sources will help you identify what those key elements are, and they will kind of back up some of the points that you want to make about what really stood out in that work for you and why you think that poet chose that particular symbol or piece of imagery, or took the certain tone. And a lot of that's going to relate back to, some of the biographical information that you've researched as well. So I get this question. I've gotten this question a couple of times over the past week. Out of the sources, how many should apply to the biography? How many should apply to the analytics? Well, that's totally up to you. But what would be reasonable to me is, a good mix, maybe 2 for the biography and 2 for the analytical. Let me do one thing real quick is I'm going to adjust my shades here. It's causing my face to become dark. So let me. And I blurred the image out for a reason. I'm not a master at video or lighting or anything like that, so I'm doing the best I can. I'm here in my office / man cave recording this live for everybody. But anyway, in a nutshell, that's basically what the poetry assignment is. Just pick a poet, pick a poem. Again, if you want to analyze some of their other poems in combination with the one required poem, feel free to do so. If you feel the need to kind of balloon your analytical section out, that's totally fine. And then, make sure that it's one part biography and the other part analytical. And again, the analytics is probably, especially when you start referring to the key elements, major elements, they're kind of piggyback off of some of the biographical stuff. Again, if you have any trouble with the poetry section or the poetry assignment, feel free to email me. I'm here to help you. Having said that, I need to kind of urge everyone here on the online class to stay up to speed, okay? Stay up to date on your assignments. For example, the fiction essay, which was due on the 18th, I believe, or the 15th. Yeah, it was the 15th. I only have half the submissions. 11 students out of 22 that have signed up for this online class have submitted an assignment for the fiction essay. So my advice to you is, if you want to gauge how you're performing in this online class in a reasonable pace, you need to get those assignments submitted to me now. Do not wait till the end of the month, because you're taking a huge risk on the quality of the grade that you get for the class, okay? And the reason why I say that is because if you go ahead and get that feedback from me on the fiction essay, that's going to help you understand what I'm looking for as far as paper mechanics and grammar and punctuation and content for the poetry essay and the Hamlet paper. Okay. So again, if you're waiting till the last minute, you're actually doing yourself a disservice, because chances are some of the mistakes that you're going to be making in that first paper, you're going to repeat in the second and third, and you're not going to see a progression in your performance. In fact, you're going to see a regression because I tend to, after I call attention to something the first time, I tend to be a little more harsh when I grade something the second time around. So again, if you care about your grade, you really are shooting for that A or that B, it would serve you well to get these assignments in sooner rather than later. And I'll leave it at that. Okay. And the same thing goes for my day class as well. You guys are watching this too, I'm sure. Anyone who has fallen behind, now is the time to catch up. The last day that I will take assignments is going to be the 8th of August. That is roughly 16 days from now. No, how many days is that? I'm not a good at math. 9 days. 17 days. Okay. So roughly 17 days left to complete an assignment and turn it in. After the 8th, I'm done. I have to have time to grade last minute papers turned in. And I have to have time to compute the scores and compute the final grade and put it into the system. And I don't plan to do that in 2 hours on the last day. So the 8th of August is the absolute deadline, the suspense date for all assignments. Nothing will be accepted after the 8th of August, which happens to be on a Sunday. So you have that whole weekend to finish up anything. All right. Okay, so now is going to start the Hamlet discussion. It's about 20 minutes in. Let me make a note of that so I can let the day class know that they can skip ahead to this point. So it says here, I actually have somebody who's tried to join the meeting and I see no one. Let me stop the share real quick. I only see one participant in here, so I'm not sure what is going on. That's interesting. I hope I set this up correctly. And now there we go. Okay. I don't see a waiting room either. So hold on a second. Let me see if there's a participants. Yeah, right here. Yeah, it's only me right now. So yeah, this is kind of awkward. It's only me, but you know what? I'm making it work. So All right, so about 20 minutes after here, that should give me a rough timeline for the day class. All right, so now we're going to start Hamlet. All right, so I'm going to give a brief overview of all the topics that I want to talk about Hamlet. Again, as I've told the day class, I'm not going to do a line by line, scene by scene, act by act analysis of Hamlet. I think it's a little more straightforward than that. And for the scope of this class being an intro to literature class, not necessarily a fully engaged literary course. There's another person that's tried to join and it's not showing up here. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have two parts to this video. I'm going to get out real quick. Actually, I'm afraid to do that. I might kill the video. So I'm just going to keep going. We'll just keep going from there. All right. So those of you who are trying to join, thank you. I appreciate you trying to join. For some reason, it's not allowing you in, even though I set it up to be free for all. But you can go back and watch this video at your leisure. Okay. So how are we going to proceed with Hamlet? Well, we're going to do it this way. First of all, I want to bring up the requirements for that essay. If Blackboard will cooperate with me. And it doesn't look like it's going to. Yeah, see, there's my Zoom session, so I don't know why it's not letting people in. So I'm going to bring up the drama. And the reason why I'm doing this is because there are key points in here that I'm going to use when we sit here and talk about key concepts from Hamlet. Again, we're looking at Hamlet from the historical context. I want to keep it at that, that way we focus the discussion in an intro level. Again, this is not a Shakespearean class. So if it were, we would sit down and we would actually discuss this play from, a scene by scene, act by act, scene by scene kind of way. Let me throw this up here, drama essay. So I've got 4 topics. Now, this is the paper for Hamlet is going to be a little different from the previous 2. I'm actually going to rope you in and force you to write about a topic of my choice, because I do not want everyone to kind of go off the train tracks here, especially at the end of the semester. So I've identified 4 key topics, 4 key themes that are present within Hamlet that you can write about and analyze from Shakespeare's point of view. Okay. And these are the topics that I'm going to use for the discussion in the lectures when we go through Hamlet's Acts 1, 2, and 3 tonight. And when we're going to be analyzing the motivations of the character Hamlet and some of the other characters, specifically his uncle Claudius and his mother Gertrude, and Ophelia, his lover, or love interest, I should say, and along with her brother Laertes and her father Polonius. There are a lot of things that are going on here, a lot of moving parts, and they all have something in common here, and it has to do with these 4 key things here. Okay, so as you can see, I'm going to introduce this real quick, and again, these are topics that I want you to select one of these topics to write your paper about, and basically answer the questions that I have here outlined for each one of these topics. Again, I'm not going to go over this because you guys can one second, somebody is having a hard time getting into the Zoom link. That may be why people are having a hard time. it looks like Northwest stripped out a key thing that you guys need. They probably stripped out that link. God, in the email. So anyway, I can't stop this, because if I do, it might kill the whole thing. So I'm just going to keep going forward. 1 second, let me address this to the people that are asking here in email. Let's see here, having some technical issues. I am recording the video as we speak, and will make it available to everyone after I am finished. Apologize for inconvenience. All right. There we go. Again, I apologize to everyone. It looks like there are some technical difficulties with Zoom and Blackboard tonight. And I just addressed Mr. Cameron Stanford and Miss Harley Littleton. I'm going to send this to you as well. Thank you for trying to log in, but for some reason it's just not working. But hey, that's the beauty of having this recorded in a video. You can go back and watch it again at your leisure. So no worries there. Okay, so for Hamlet, 4 topics, 4 things that you're going to see in the play Hamlet, and hopefully you guys have taken my advice and watched the play first. If you haven't, you can watch the play. I've actually linked a couple of good productions on YouTube. It's available for free. It doesn't cost you anything. And one of them is a play that was performed in the Globe Theater. The other one was by Bob Jones University, a little more traditional in its composition. Or you can choose one of your own. So what I suggest you all do is actually listen to the play as it's being performed on stage before you actually try to sit down and dissect the play on your own in the text. Because again, as I've told my day class, plays were never meant to be read. They were meant to be heard. And for well over a couple of thousand years, that's how people referred to plays. When they discussed, actually interacted with one, is, hey, we heard Hamlet perform the other night. Why? Because the way that the play is set up is that you're a participant in the play. Every member of the audience is an active participant in that production, just as the characters on the stage are. You are there with them. You're listening to their conversations. You may not be an active person in the play itself, but you're a non-participating character, I guess you can say. So that's why it's very important to listen to the play, to watch the production and listen to the characters and everything that they're saying, because you're not going to get that from the text. It's very similar to everyday conversations that we have with family and friends. You ever had that opportunity or that instance where someone sends you a text message or an email, and what they intended to say in that email is completely different than what you inferred from that text or email? And the reason why is because there's a lot that's lost in the nonverbal communication method. So the play is very similar to that. In order to really understand everything that's going on, you need to see it with your own eyes. You need to hear it with your own ears. Just sitting down and reading it, you're going to miss half of the stuff that you're looking for. All right. And that's probably one of the main reasons why people tend not to like Shakespeare, especially his plays. They don't understand it. I can't figure out the language. Well, that's because you're probably sitting down reading it, or your teacher in high school probably forced you to interact with Hamlet in that way by sitting down and reading it. And that's not how the play was meant to be experienced. Okay, so again, I want to advise everyone and encourage everyone to listen to the production, and I guarantee you, once you do, you're going to pick up on these 4 topics. So here's 4 key topics that we're going to talk about tonight. Specifically, I'm going to talk about topic number 2, which is revenge, which is basically what the whole play centers around. Hamlet is on a quest for vengeance because his father has recently passed away, and at first they were led to believe that he died peacefully in the night, and then through a chance meeting with the ghost of Hamlet's father, he learns that, oh no, it was a murder most foul. No, I did not die peacefully in my sleep. I was murdered, which you've seen this story play out in many other time and time again in many other productions of movies and TV shows where a loved one is lost, and that causes such a rage in the surviving family member where they're going to get revenge no matter what. And that's the same can be said here in Hamlet. The difference is Hamlet goes about the quest of revenge in a way that most people don't anticipate, especially considering his background. We'll cover more of that here in a few minutes, but revenge in Hamlet, coupled with a succession crisis. And what do I mean by that? I mean the fact that we have a monarchy here. And for those of you who don't know, monarchies function in a certain way to where the king takes a queen, he has a big family. And traditionally in Western European monarchies, whenever the king passes away, the crown passes to his eldest firstborn son, legitimate firstborn son that has been recognized by the church, recognized by the aristocracy as being valid, legitimate, and ordained. I guess you can not ordained, anointed by the supreme head of the church within that jurisdiction as being the next in line to the throne. The death of Hamlet's father and the way that the crown passed to the next person in line created what we call a succession crisis. Now, and again, we'll talk about that more here in a few minutes. But as you'll see throughout English history, there's been several instances where we have succession crises that have popped up. And as a result, there's been a lot of consequences and just absolute trauma based on these succession crises. All right, so that's really the supreme topic. That should be number 1. But I've got listed here as number 1. The second topic that I'm going to talk about is Hamlet's relationship with women. One of the things you'll learn about Shakespeare is that he is very, very good with women. He understands women. He's able to get into their minds and really see the world through their perspective. And you can't find a better example of that than Romeo and Juliet. There's a scene that takes place between the nurse and Juliet and her mother. That's a very sensitive scene. And it's one of those scenes where, you have this coming of age story and there's this loss that takes place when a mother learns that her daughter is going to leave the house and go and marry another person. And you can just see the emotion on that character's face. And all of that was written by Shakespeare. So he's really good with women. Unfortunately, his character, Hamlet, was not very good with women. And we have a couple of key points that we want to bring out in this story. And why is it that Hamlet had a hard time relating to women, specifically his mother and Ophelia in this story? And a lot of that has to do with the inspiration for this story as well. There's an excellent example that I'm going to talk about here in the next few minutes that really brings up two of these topics together, which is the revenge arc and Hamlet's relationship with women, along with the succession crisis. Topic number 3 is death and decay. Now, this one, you see this all throughout Hamlet. In fact, in the way that Hamlet ends is all about death and decay. Excuse me, I had to take a little drink there to quench my thirst. But we're not only talking about the physical death that takes place, specifically at the pursuit of at the end of Hamlet's quest for revenge. We're also talking about a mental decay and a mental death that takes place here, because clearly we have several characters in here who are suffering from some type of mental health issues. And as the play progresses and moves on, you can actually see the decay happen over time, specifically in Ophelia and Hamlet as well. So death and decay is going to be this kind of two-sided coin here. If you're interested in that topic, you can write about the physical examples of death and decay and how those revenge plots brought about a lot of death and decay in there, but also the mental state of Hamlet as well. God, oh man, I'm losing my thoughts today. But the progress of this mental collapse that takes place in Ophelia and in Hamlet. Like I said, it's going to provide a two-sided coin there if you want to choose this topic of death and decay for writing your paper. And then the last one is faith and religion. And in some ways, this kind of plays back into the death and decay argument, but it can also apply to the revenge arc as well. Even though there is no character in here who represents the church, represents the faith of the country, we can ascertain the place that it takes, the setting which the play takes place, being a Western European country during the late medieval period, moving into Renaissance times, is probably a Christian nation. And with that comes the Catholic faith, or possibly the Protestant faith, with some of the more traditional Catholic traditions still intact within the Protestant churches. So you're going to see that, and we probably won't hit on it tonight, but especially next week when we wrap it up, we're going to really hit some of the key moments where faith and religion start to play a role in dictating the course of the events that takes place in the play Hamlet. But again, I want to move back real quick. We're going to start off, and again, I'm going to talk about Acts 1 and 2 and 3 from the perspective of a couple of these topics tonight. And specifically, we want to talk about the revenge angle, because again, this story is all about revenge, and also the act of the succession crisis of the crown. Now, first of all, most people who either watch Hamlet or read Hamlet pick up on the revenge angle immediately, and because of the characters and the relationships of the characters, immediately draw some kind of comparison or allusion to another work that happens to be more pop culture and familiar to people, and that would be The Lion King, Disney's The Lion King. And yes, that story was inspired by Hamlet. In that story, you have the young Simba who very close to his father, and unfortunately his father was murdered, and even though Simba didn't know that at the time, he thought it was an accident, but his uncle manipulated him into believing that it was his fault, thus causing Simba to run away. until he gets this key information. And yeah, I need to come back and take my rightful place at the throne. And, everybody's probably seen the movie. You know what happens at the end. It's a Disney movie. You know that Simba's going to win at the end. Hamlet, a little bit different. Okay, because so similar to the Lion King, the way we start off with Hamlet is we understand that there's a lot of political turmoil in the Kingdom of Denmark at this time, which is where our play opens up. In the Kingdom of Denmark, the king is dead. The true king is dead. And again, as I mentioned before, you would expect that Hamlet would take the throne, but when we first meet Hamlet in this play, he's still a prince. And the reason for that is because his uncle Claudius has taken the throne, probably with the assistance of his former sister-in-law, now wife, Gertrude, who happens to be Hamlet's mother. It's a very convoluted, complex family situation because not only is Hamlet's uncle now his stepfather, Hamlet's mother is also now his step aunt. It's crazy. It's weird. And it causes a lot of mental anguish and a lot of mental confusion. And I think that's one of the key elements that Shakespeare is playing on here, to create this mental anguish that Hamlet is experiencing when we first meet him in the play. And if you remember, when we first come across Hamlet, he is sitting by himself off stage, listening to the fanfare that's taking place while the new King Claudius and his mother, Queen Gertrude, second time over, is entertaining court. For those of you who don't understand that terminology, entertaining court is just to mean a fanciful term for the nobles, the aristocracy have come to call on the king to either ask favors or ask permission to act in his name. And then that's the formal audience when the king would grant that permission or grant that privilege to a member of the nobility who's ever asking for permission. And Hamlet is sitting there listening to all this, but he's off in a fog, right? He is, you can see the mental anguish that character is going through from the very beginning of that play. Coupled with the fact, now of course I'm bouncing around here, but that's okay. You can watch the play, you can kind of pick up where I'm going with this. Coupled with the fact that he also learns in Act 1 that his first perception of his father's death, and again, everyone believes in the castle that the old king died in his sleep, but through interaction with this ghostly apparition that happens to come to the Night's Watch and also to his friend Horatio, Hamlet learns that his father, and through a conversation with the ghost, that no, I did not die in my sleep. I was in fact the victim of a murder most foul. Extremely egregious. Now, if you listen to the play, you'll understand that according to the ghost, he died with poison, which is for a king, a warrior king at that, probably the most denigrating, embarrassing, dishonorable deaths that any warrior king could ever come across, okay, or experience, I should say. Coupled with the fact that this is, even though it's a Christian kingdom, there's still a lot of Viking traditions left over. And again, this warrior king who may now be Christian would still look upon, the opportunity to die on the battlefield as one that would be deserving. In the old days, they would call that Valhalla. And a warrior king would have to die on the field of battle in order to go on to Valhalla, a very honored place for warriors, not die as the gods during that time would deem be very dishonorable through the act of poison, especially in the way it was applied. So this is a deep wound that has been committed and on this warrior king, and he wants revenge for it. And of course, as we see in the play, that he comes to his son and reveals the treachery, reveals the deceit, and reveals the murder to him. This is how I truly died, and this is who did it. Now, I want to stop right there because there's a couple of things we need to talk about in regards to faith and religion here. We've got a couple of things that you can explore in your paper. There are many different scholastic opinions on what this scene truly represent from many different schools of thought. From the more literal, yeah, this is an instance where if you come from a Catholic tradition, this is a ghost who is probably stuck in purgatory and is communicating with a family member in order to right the wrong that is keeping me from allowing to move on to my heavenly rewards. From a more cynical Christian viewpoint, or even a different religious viewpoint, not just Christian, maybe Islamic or even some of the other faith and traditions out there, this spirit could be a malevolent spirit, kind of like the devil that is coming to torment and manipulate Hamlet in his fragile mental state, and is there just to cause, chaos and destruction as a result, seizing upon an opportunity when a man is just beaten down like that. Or, the one that I do not necessarily agree with, because you have other characters who tried to interact with this ghost and it didn't work. Some people tend to think that this ghost is just an apparition of Hamlet's fragile mind. Again, I don't buy into that theory, because you actually have other characters who are interacting with this spirit or this ghostly figure. Now, another possibility, and this goes back to Greek tradition, where they would use certain mechanics on stage to portray either the power of the Greek gods or the Greek gods themselves. They use these little machinations, these little instances that would represent the Greek god on stage, instead of using a character which was considered to be sacrilegious. They would not use a character to portray a god on stage, but they would use some kind of little machination to represent either that god or the power that god holds. It is reasonable to think that Shakespeare is possibly drawing on that tradition, that Greek tradition. I'm not entirely buying into that theory, because he was not as well versed in Greek traditions as he was Latin traditions. In fact, that's one of the arguments that a lot of people have against Shakespeare, is he was too much Latin and not enough Greek. But I will entertain the theory that, hey, it's possible that Shakespeare is using that tradition of a machination in a different way, because remember, at the time that the play opens up, because the king is dead, because we have a succession crisis, we also have a political crisis that's going on, because the Kingdom of Denmark is in a state of emergency, heightened awareness, not only because of instability that's going on within the castle walls, but also in the instability that's going on outside of the castle walls. The Prince of Norway, Fortinbras, is on the warpath, and even though his sights are not necessarily set on Denmark, but on Poland, specifically a small little strip of Poland, that could be a military ruse in order to divert the Danes' attentions onto other things, as a distraction, while at the same time this machination could be used to manipulate, almost like a Trojan horse from within, to crumble the fragile state of the castle and the political system currently set up there, in hopes of crumbling it to the ground so that he could take over. Again, I'm entertaining that theory, not necessarily totally bought in, but I will entertain that theory if you want to go down that path. So again, this is the state that we find ourselves with Hamlet, regardless of the motivations or instrumentations being used here to manipulate Hamlet. Hamlet is being manipulated, either by his father, either by the devil, or either by Fortinbras. It doesn't matter. He's been given this quest by the ghost of his father, who also instructs him, do not harm your mother. Only your uncle here is to fault. But again, we're talking about a young man who has been set aside, not only by the country, right? He's not the king of Denmark. He's still the prince. He's been passed over for another. And in some ways, his mother has passed him over for another as well. So again, you've got the situation where a young man who we would expect to take up a sword at this point, or at least escape and try to forge an army from somewhere, like a good young Danish prince would do, we have this situation where we have this young prince who is very fragile, very cerebral, who is getting lost into the paranoia and machinations of his own mind in order to reason what is true versus what is not true. Should I believe this entity? Is my uncle truly responsible for the death of my father? Is my mother somehow involved? If they are involved, who else is involved? Again, these are the things that swimming around in Hamlet's mind at the very beginning of the play. There are some real life allusions to that as well. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause here for a second. I'm going to go refresh my drink because my throat is getting dry. I'm going to pause. Let me stop the share here real quick. And I'm going to pause the record. Okay, I'm back. Excuse me. I had to get a quick drink there. I was getting parched. Okay, so we have this situation where Hamlet is in a very fragile state, and he's trying to reason in his fragile mind what could be true about what he was told, who is involved, and how should he go about finding the truth that lies beneath. Okay, so but we do have some real life references that we want to talk about here, and specifically when it comes to the act of secession. Why is this an instrument that Shakespeare would use to set up the events of this play? Well, to understand that, you really need to understand the historical context of the time in which Shakespeare lived on the throne of England. When this play was produced and being performed, sat Queen Elizabeth I. Now, Queen Elizabeth I is considered to be, she ruled sometime from the 1540s, 1550s, all the way through 1603. She was considered to be a good queen, according to historians. She led what's called the Golden Age of England, although, as we know, the history that's being written a lot of times is distorted. It's not the true history of what actually happened. It's always a sanitized or a viewpoint that's full of propaganda. But anyway, Queen Elizabeth, who sat on the throne, was the last of the Tudor dynasty that Henry VII forged on the field of battle after the Wars of the Roses between the houses of Lancaster and York. You've probably heard this reference if you watch the Game of Thrones. We have a couple of houses, families in there called the Lannisters and Starks. They're based very loosely on the Lancasters and the Yorks, two branching families that descended from one elderly monarch back in medieval times by the name of Edward III, who died without a male legitimate heir on the throne. And that's what we call a succession crisis. Whenever the king passes away in medieval times, that has always led to some kind of conflict because as you probably, you may have seen this within your own family, or maybe have a friend that had a family where the matriarch or the patriarch passes away, and then next thing you know, all the family members come out of nowhere. They start fussing and fighting over about who gets this, who gets that, and I mean it's just chaos at that point. A very similar, but more on a macro scale, event would take place whenever a king, not only just in England but anywhere throughout Europe, passed away without a legitimate heir. And that's what happened in medieval times when Edward III, the last of the true Plantagenets, passed away without a male heir to sit on the throne. You had this legitimate line of once removed family members in the houses of York. And then you had this illegitimate line, what they called forgive my terminology here, the bastard line from the House of Lancaster. And for a period of about 50, 60 years, the crown passed back and forth between these two houses. And it was a very chaotic time for the Kingdom of England, having that kind of instability, not only politically, but even at some points religiously. You just created that conflict, and it created such a tumultuous time that allegiances flip-flopped back and forth a lot. Of course, when you have two warring houses like they did with the Lancasters and Yorks, they were only strong as the nobles who supported them, and the knights, the gentry that supported them, and that depended on money, and that depended on power and influence. And as I've said, loyalties shift back and forth when you have an unstable monarchy like that, or system. But then you fast forward to a point where Henry Tudor, who came out of nowhere from that bastard line, or that illegitimate line in the House of Lancaster, won his crown in the last battle in the Wars of the Roses. He defeated Richard III, who was the uncle and Lord Protector of a child prince, Edward V, and defeated on the field of battle. And that pretty much ended the chaos for a short time. In order to maintain stability at that point, Henry Tudor, who became the Henry VII, married a young, beautiful woman from the House of York by the name of Elizabeth, in order to bring those two houses together and create stability. The interesting thing about that story is the fact that Richard III, who was the last of the Yorks to take the crown, he was not a legitimate king himself either. Rightfully, that crown, after his brother Edward IV passed away, should have passed on to Edward V, who was a very young boy at the time. He and his younger brother. They are the princes. You probably heard the story about the princes that were locked in the Tower of London and vanished. These are the two princes that's being referred to here, and Richard was somehow involved in their demise, and of course he usurped the throne from them. So he is a wonderful example of King Claudius here, who usurped the throne from Hamlet. The difference is that Hamlet Claudius wasn't smart enough to get rid of Hamlet, as Richard was, for a short time, kind of smart enough to do with his own situation, as bad as it is to say, and as bad as the events were. That was the culture of the time. So these acts of succession are very common themes at this point in Shakespeare's writing. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that Queen Elizabeth herself is sitting on the throne of England, a very old lady, a very scarred lady from the fact that smallpox ravaged her body at a very young age. She never married. Considered it to be a political threat if she ever allowed herself to fall in love with a man, and to marry according to the wishes of the aristocracy. She never married, and that created a succession crisis once again. And in fact, you've got someone like Shakespeare who is sitting back, who again, the day class has heard my theories that I do believe William Shakespeare was a pen name, used a pseudonym for a nobleman, the Earl of Oxford, who was a very studious man and happened to have ties to the Plantagenet families. Understood that the fact that Queen Elizabeth was growing old and did not have a successor lined up created a situation that could de-evolved back into a very chaotic time, like they just got out of 60 years previous, or actually 70 years previously, or actually, no, sorry, longer than that, over 100 years ago, when the Wars of the Roses ended, when her grandfather Henry VII took power. So you've got a situation here where Shakespeare is looking back at this, and he knows this history. And he knows that this is going to create a very, very chaotic situation, which serves as wonderful inspiration for the play Hamlet, because even though Hamlet is the legal successor to the dead King Hamlet, we've created succession crisis here because we've broken the chain. That crown should have passed from King Hamlet to Prince Hamlet, and instead it was usurped by his uncle, King Claudius, kind of that Richard III illusion. And they probably was helped in part by Hamlet's mother, Gertrude, which is going to set the stage for that conflict that we see there between him and women. Now, I'm going to throw up my notes here real quick. You can still see me on the screen. Now, we've gotten to the point in the play where Hamlet is aware, but now he has to do something about it. Again, you would expect a young prince to, especially a Viking prince, be at a point where he's ready to take charge and lead an army out onto the field and win his crown back, by force if necessary. But that's not what we have here. What we have is a situation where Hamlet is going to use a different weapon that he thinks is more superior than any sword or any shield, and that is the power of his mind. Now, again, we're going to call into question here, but how fragile is that mind? How coherent is that mind? Well, we're going to see that take place throughout the play. What Hamlet decides to do, very much like the playwright Shakespeare himself, he is going to take an opportunity to, and here's the question you may want to ask, is if he's truly crazy or if he's truly going through mental decay, give everyone the perception that he is crazy or he is suffering from some kind of mental health issue. And that way he can keep them off his trail they will lower their guard, and maybe he can find evidence to what the truth is here. Is what the ghost told me true, right? Did my father in fact die in the way that the ghost told me he died? Again, he's got to have that proof, right? He just can't go in there willy-nilly and take his revenge. He's got to have some kind of proof. But again, in the quest to get this proof, and the quest that Hamlet's going to execute to get this evidence, there's going to be opportunities where we see this strained relationship between he and his mother, and he and his love interest here, Ophelia. And specifically, Gertrude is going to take the brunt of his, I guess, the releasing the anger in the pursuit of this quest for revenge. And Ophelia, unfortunately, is a bystander in all this. But so again, we kind of backtrack just a little bit here. We've got the stage set where Hamlet is going to act as a playwright, so to speak. He's going to manipulate people into doing what he wants them to do, hopefully say what he wants them to say. And he's going to position them, hopefully, on the stage in order to come about and obtain the evidence that he's looking for, which is that, yes, Claudius indeed is responsible for this. At the same time, he again has to mask his intentions here and keep people thrown off the trail. Now, let me throw this up here real quick. We've got some other key people that are going to play a part in this. So again, you've got Claudius, who's kind of like that Richard III character. Hamlet himself, with the persona that he has, he's very much like, say, Henry VIII of England in some ways. And the fact that Henry VIII was willing to observe, if necessary, who his true enemies were, and take the time that was necessary to sit back and observe, play with them mentally to make sure, okay, if this person's indeed guilty of sedition or treason, I'm going to play with them and manipulate them and cause them to reveal themselves. And very much like a playwright does with manipulating characters and putting them on the stage where they want. Hamlet is going to carry out this quest in very similar fashion. Gertrude, I've been asked, well, if we have this historical reference for Hamlet and for Claudius, who would you compare Gertrude to? And I don't think there's a better character from actual history than probably Eleanor of Aquitaine. Gertrude is in this position. Now, I want you to think about Gertrude's position in the story right now. She's married to the king of Denmark. She has a son. She gives him the ultimate prize that a woman could give a man during this time period, which is a son, not just a child, but a son, a male heir, someone who can carry on the family name and to, in this case, take the crown, pass the crown to my son. And she loses that, right? Whether it be by her own hand or helping Claudius, we don't really know. We don't have any evidence to state emphatically that Gertrude played a part in it. I would tend to disagree with anyone who says she probably did it herself. But she was not a stupid woman. She was a very cunning woman. She knew exactly what she needed to do to survive. And in many ways, she was probably not only looking out for her own self-interest, but she was probably looking out for the self-interest of her son as well, going along to make sure that she could control the situation as best she could. to protect the interests of herself and her son. Now, we do have an instance if you're going to write about an allusion to Gertrude in this respect. Eleanor of Aquitaine, who was married to Henry II, who was the very first Plantagenet. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a young French noble lady who had been married before. I think she was married to the King of France before he passed away during that time. But she inherited a large, vast estate in France known as Aquitaine. And Henry II, when he married her, knew that he was not only going to have a young, attractive lady that could give him sons, but along with her came large amounts of land in France, which really set the stage for future wars. When, if you study history, the history between England and France, a lot of the conflicts and the wars that took place over hundreds and hundreds of years started with that incident with the marriage between Henry II and Eleanor of Aquitaine, bringing that French land under the English crown and making it English. That has created a lot of conflict since then. But Eleanor was a very powerful, she was not a meek lady. If Henry II, as he's been often referred to as being the lion in winter, she was very much a lioness herself. She was very politically savvy. She knew how to manipulate people to get what she want. She would make people think that she was this weak woman who it was in need of saving, when at the same time, whatever situation she was getting saved from was perfectly manipulated and orchestrated by her. She was that good. She was extremely good at manipulating men too, not only Henry, but also the three sons that she bore him. Rich, you probably heard of one, the famous Richard the Lionheart, and then King John, who signed the Magna Carta. Both of those guys were sons of Eleanor of Aquitaine through Henry II. So Eleanor is that powerful medieval example of that medieval woman who was very good at giving the perception that she was meek, that she was submissive to her husband, all the while in the back of the scene she was pulling the strings like a puppeteer and manipulating. And if you look at Gertrude, she has a lot of characteristics, a lot of qualities that Eleanor of Aquitaine had. And if you look at the relationship between Hamlet and Gertrude versus especially Eleanor of Aquitaine and Richard the Lionheart, they're very, very similar relationships there. Richard did not trust Eleanor as far as he could throw her. She always favored John, the youngest son. Richard never got along with her. He always distrusted her. He couldn't even stand to be around her and listen to her. And in some cases, when you see Hamlet in this play, you got to get a sense that he's kind of connecting into that that mindset of a young son who has become disillusioned by the realities of who his mother is, that she's not this maternal figure that is just ready to embrace him and make heal the boo-boo and make the hurt go away. No, she's more of a cold, callous, overarching maternal figure that does love, but she expresses that love in a different way, and one that can be seen as being cold and ruthless. And I'm not saying that Gertrude was totally that. I'm not saying that at all, but she is tapping into some of those qualities that Eleanor of Aquitaine displayed in each and every story that we've got of Eleanor. She was a very ruthless, cold woman. No doubt she loved her sons. She just expressed it in a different way. And again, you can see a little bit of that in Henry VIII as well in relation to Hamlet, because Henry VIII, a more contemporary example for the strained relationship between a son and his mother. King Henry VIII was never meant to be king. He had an older brother by the name of Arthur, who was the first in line, but like many of the Tudor family, they were very sickly, not very malnourished kind of people or a family. And the young Arthur passed away, at the very early age. I think he was 15 or 16, not shortly after he was married to Catherine of Aragon from Spain. And then once he passed away, of course, Henry VIII, the future Henry VIII, Henry the Tudor, became the Prince of Wales. And of course, Henry VII didn't want to lose the benefits of having a Spanish princess in his court. So he married her off to Henry VIII. But up until this time, Henry VIII, who was close to his mother, became disillusioned by women very quickly because Elizabeth made it known that Henry, although adorable, did not possess the qualities that was needed to be king. And someone with the ego like Henry Tudor, the future Henry VIII, he didn't take that very well. And the fact that this, coupled with many other examples that you could read about on your own, Henry developed a serious distrust of women. And in some cases, he didn't trust Catherine of Aragon either, because of the relationship that she had before with his brother. He looked at her as, trying to make the most of an opportunity to stay in England and become the future Queen of England. And Henry, being a very pious person, a very religious person early on, there was just so many examples. And again, this is not a history class, but I'm just throwing some little things out there where you can think about. But some of the events in the young Henry's life mimics what you see here in Hamlet. This distrust that is present between him and his mother. And unfortunately, that distrust carries over in relationships with other women. Ophelia, very early on in this quest for vengeance, we have a couple of meetings between Hamlet and Ophelia that are very cruel. This is an instance where Ophelia is almost as though she's been promised to be the future princess, or possibly the future Queen of Denmark, through marriage to Hamlet. And the times that we see Hamlet interact with her, he is extremely cruel, very, very cold and callous towards her. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this. Again, the political situation that we have here in Denmark is very unstable. It's volatile. And it could be that Hamlet was trying to look out for her best interest, treat them coldly, push them away to save them from any kind of future consequences, negative consequences that are coming about. Or it could be because of the politics. He just genuinely did not trust her, no more than he trusted his own mother for marrying the brother of his dead father, so conveniently close after his death. So all of these things, what we've talked about so far in the first couple of acts, again, we have this succession crisis, this act of revenge that is creating such turmoil within Hamlet that his mental state is starting to break down. It's affecting his relationship with his mother. It's affecting the relationship he has with his love interest. It's even affecting the relationships he has with all the characters around him, to the point where he becomes insulated within his own I guess you can call it reality distortion field. He perceives these things to be true. He's trying to verify whether or not they're true, and he's not going to allow anyone to enter his bubble to distort his perspective. So having said that, how is he going to carry this out? Well, again, much like Shakespeare, the playwright, is manipulating the characters and putting them on stage where he thinks they should be in order to reveal little things here and there. Hamlet's going to do the same thing. And he's going to use plays, specifically famous Greek and Latin plays that have very specific themes in mind to portray on the stage in order to gauge the guilt level in his uncle, in his mother, and even in some of the other characters that he might suspect, like Ophelia or Polonius, or even her brother Laertes. Again, these are plays that are being performed with the specific intention of gauging the reaction of the audience that's listening to the characters. Not much different than Shakespeare himself during the time in which this play is being performed. Again, I remind you, for those who have heard this reference before, Shakespeare, with a lot of the themes in his work, was playing a very dangerous game. Whenever you called into question the legitimacy of a monarch sitting on the throne, the act of succession itself, or the fragile nature of succeeding kings one to another, what is legitimate, what is not, you can create a target on your back that is a huge political target. And when you're talking about the Tudor dynasty, you're talking about a very dangerous game, more so than what you've seen in the Game of Thrones. The Tudor monarchs were not people that you wanted to trifle with. They were very cruel, very vengeful, and they did not mind cutting the heads off of people they considered to be political opponents. In fact, they would do so before they even found the validity in an accusation in many cases. And a lot of this stemmed from the fact that many of them were very paranoid, because in the back of their minds, they always knew that the patriarch that started the dynasty was in fact someone who was not legitimate according to the eyes of the church, and really to the eyes of the aristocracy. But because he won his crown on the field of battle, they went along with it, because who wants to be the next one in line to fight the warrior king? And so when you have an author like Shakespeare, who is, through his plays, kind of retelling some of these themes and of recalling some of these events and using them in his plays, especially for someone like Elizabeth, who found herself at the middle of many threats against her reign, a simple play like this could have been perceived as propaganda to inspire rebellion and sedition against her reign, even as an old lady. And Shakespeare, again, that's why I believe Shakespeare, the poet, the playwright, was actually a pseudonym for someone who was of noble birth, who would be aware of the political ramifications of these accusations and themes in the play, knew the game that he was playing, very similar to what Hamlet's doing to the characters in this play. All right. Okay. So here's what I'm going to stop the video here, because again, I don't want it to get too long and then cause YouTube to crap out and not upload my video. So I'm going to stop it right here. Plus the fact that my voice is getting weak. I'm going to continue this discussion tomorrow, record a video, and I'll upload it again to Blackboard for everybody to watch and use. Okay. So what we'll do tomorrow is we'll talk a little more about these topics of revenge, and the relationship with women. And we will work our way through some more events of the play that kind of relate to these topics as well. And then we'll also tie that into faith and religion and death and decay. So there's probably a couple more videos coming. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage and the foundation here. Again, this is an awkward format being online, and I'm just talking to myself to a camera here. And for those of you who tried to log in tonight, I apologize. I'm sorry it didn't work out. But again, please send me your questions and comments, and I'll address those not only through email, but if I feel that it's something that can be addressed to the whole class, I will mention that in the next video that I'm going to create tomorrow. Okay. So again, I'll pick it back up tomorrow with another video. We'll move through the play a little bit more. We're going to get to the point where Hamlet is going to start using these plays to call some people out. And we're going to see what their reactions are. And again, we're going to tie those into the themes that we're discussing. Okay. Hope you all have a good night, and I'll see you in the next video.